Now, on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app, O'Connor and Company.
Oh, well, it's just another quiet Friday here in 2025. The news cycle is relentless. We are loaded up. We had all these things that we were all set up to talk about, and then suddenly we get a pope, and not only is it a pope, it's an American pope, and
yes,
we got to unpack all of that. Coming up at 7:05, we're going to speak with the president and CEO of Airlines for America about the new transportation secretary's plan for air traffic control that was unveiled yesterday. That sort of got buried in all the news. 7:35, the SBA Administrator Kelly Loeffler. 8:05, Ed Morrissey, my colleague over at Town Hall. He runs Hot Air, and he covered the last conclave on the Pope. He's got plenty to feed us about new Pope Leo XIV. And, of course, Patrice, I apologize. I'm sorry. I know that you were sort of in the running. They're one of the final names for Pope, but it's just not going to happen this time around for you. But you're young.
Listen,
you have a chance, I suppose.
Larry, if my name is up for Pope, you guys Catholics are in real trouble. Listen, because I'm a Protestant.
I mean, that's fair to say. Yeah. Good morning to you, Patrice.
Happy Friday, Larry.
We are going to have a lot to say about the Pope, and I recognize you're not Catholic, but that's good because I think there's a lot of things going on. This is getting a lot of attention, a lot of news. Everybody's watching it, and so there's probably a lot of questions and a lot of perspectives that non-Catholics might have on this, where they don't quite understand, they're confused. So hopefully, our dialogue over that might illuminate such things. So
I'm looking forward to it. I'm learning every time there's a new pope. I learn something new about this in process.
Yeah, and the pageantry and the beauty of it was really something, and everyone got to see all the excitement from the white smoke emerging, and then you say, okay, we got a pope, but who is it? And then you got to wait an hour until you find out who it is, and the throngs at St. Peter's Square. It's pretty cool. On the outset, never thought in my lifetime I'd see an American pope. And pretty cool that he's Midwestern. I'm a little concerned that he might be a Bears fan.
Well,
that's right there is a judgment problem, right?
I mean, now he's probably going to be more into soccer or football because he's the Pope for the rest of the world.
That's true.
As much as we love American football, the real football that the world recognizes is played with no hands.
You know what? You might have to be in a timeout square for a second here. I might have to put you in the corner after that statement. How dare you? There's only one football. The other is soccer, although that does lend a question that when the World Cup is here in 26, I'm guessing the Pope does enjoy soccer, since he spent much of his time in his career in Europe and in Latin America. He might be here. Maybe he'll preside over the World Cup here in America. There's a whole lot of American triumphalism going on here. With an American Pope, World Cup coming to America, Olympics coming to America, the 250th anniversary of America. It's like we can't stop the winning, for God's sake.
America is back on the map. Not that we had disappeared, but I mean, we are the hot spot again.
Let's break down who Pope Leo XIV is. He was born Robert Prevost in Chicago, 1955. That means, of course, he's 69 years old. This September, he'll turn 70, which is about average age for a pope. Not super. Although I got to say, these days, 69 is a lot younger than it was, 30 years ago. When he emerged, I got a Pope John Paul II vibe from him. I don't know why. Because Benedict looked old when he came out. Francis looked old when he came out. I didn't think Leo looked that old. Maybe it was just the familiarity of him sort of having an American pose and posture and carried himself in a more familiar American way. But there was something about him that seemed like a very vibrant 69. Let's just leave it at that. He's a member of the Augustinian order. What does that mean? Well, it's the Order of St. Augustine, the great church father, doctor of the church, saint from the 5th century, who is actually pretty revered across Christian spectrums. Most Protestants will joke that their favorite Catholic was Augustine, or Augustine, depending on your pronunciation. He had his final vows as a priest in 1982. That was during John Paul II's pontificate. In fact, there is a remarkable photograph circulating now of then Father Bob, In fact, Meredith continues to call him Pope Bob, which is kind of hilarious. Pope Bob just sounds like the guy down the street that you borrow the lawnmower from. Father Bob, in his priestly vestments, meeting Pope John Paul II and shaking his hand. That's a pretty remarkable photograph to see this young priest in the 80s shaking hands with the Pope, and then in 2025 he becomes Pope. As an Augustinian priest, his commitment has been to community, unity, missionary work, very different than Pope Francis, who was in the Jesuit order of priests, where they I shouldn't say overemphasize, but I would characterize Jesuits as sort of emphasizing intellectualism and study and education. And not that this Pope is not educated. I'll get to his education in a moment. But the Jesuits end up sort of feeling like the college professor. They end up sort of being a little loosey-goosey, their reputation at least. The Jesuits who came out of the 60s, 70s, and 80s were sort of the Birkenstock-wearing, tie-dye, T-shirt wearing, hold hands, I'd like to buy the world a Coke kind of priest, which is fine in the church. You need those guys, but they're not necessarily the most orderly, traditional leaders all the time. Some of the wackiest ideas in the American Catholic Church have come from Jesuits. That's my opinion. I stand by it. The fact that Leo is not a Jesuit, I think, resonates, and it makes a difference, and it certainly draws a distinction from his predecessor, Pope Francis. Let me just pause here for a moment to let people know that if they are shooting their opinion of the Pope in terms of being traditional, non-traditional, conservative, liberal, what have you, if you're shooting that through the lens of American politics, it's impossible to do. Many people may refer to Francis as a liberal pope. He probably was a pretty liberal pope. But guess what? He was more pro-life than many Republicans on Capitol Hill. He affirmed two genders. He referred to abortion. This is Pope Francis. Everyone calls him a left-wing, liberal, woke pope, right? But he referred to abortion as likening it to hiring a hitman in an assassination. I'm sorry, you got that view on the unborn in American politics? There ain't no way you're a woke Democrat, right? So you can't fit Catholic leaders, cardinals, and popes into a tidy little category that would work in American politics. I can tell you this about Pope Leo XIV from Chicago. He is going to be more pro-life than probably anybody you've ever met. And as far as gender ideology, well, here's a quote from him. The promotion of gender ideology is confusing because it seeks to create genders that don't exist. He has been full square on board with the idea that there are men and there are women. And any kind of ideology that confuses those two ideas is dangerous and destructive and sinful. That ain't going to fit in woke American politics. That said, he may not be a woke pope by definition of American politics. He's also not a MAGA pope. And we'll get into that in a moment and some more about this extraordinary development in world history. Yes, we have a pope, and he's from Chicago. And I still can't quite get over that because I never thought in my lifetime I would see an American pope. It's 5:15.
WMAL, making sense of the news. Live from the Home Paramount Pest Control Studios. Home Paramount, the leader in pest control since 1939.
Et benedictio Dei omnipotentis, Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti descendat super vos et maniat semper.
With that announcement, you could hear the sort of reaction from the throng at St. Peter's and then sort of like a wave of recognition, realizing, wait a second, this guy's American. Let's be clear here. I would not necessarily categorize him as an American pope. I would categorize him as a pope born in America. And let me explain. First of all, he grew up in America, absolutely. He was educated at Villanova University, where he co-founded the pro-life club there, Villanovians for Life. He got his advanced degree in theology and canon law at the Vatican, at the St. Thomas Aquinas University there, which is very well known. Angelicus, I think, is what they refer to it as. But he became a canon lawyer as well. He then was assigned to Peru and served as a bishop down there. He then later returned to Rome and was what's called the prefect of the dicastery for bishops and president on the Pontifical Commission for Latin America. So I'm trying to sort of lay this out here. He is absolutely an international man. He has spent much of his time, yes, in America, but also in Latin America, in Peru, and also in Rome. Because of that, many of the bishops, he was in charge of the bishops and sort of, the president of the bishops club. Those bishops, many of them become cardinals. Cardinals are bishops. They're just sort of elevated bishops, right? They all knew him from that role in Rome. He spent a lot of time. So the Italian cardinals knew him very well because he was there. That's why he speaks impeccable Italian. He also spent a lot of time in South America. So all of the Latin American cardinals knew him well and worked with him. He also knew and interacted with the American cardinals. You see what I'm saying here? Not to shoot it completely through political terms, but there was a vote here. And to win a vote, 2/3 majority, you got to have some coalition of cardinals who know you, trust you, and respect you. And this guy had his bases covered in Italy, Europe, as well as in Latin America and in the United States. That's a huge part of the voting bloc. So the Cardinals relatively quickly coalesced around this guy, and he had the votes. Now, he went to Peru, as I said, and served as bishop there and then came to Rome. He's only been a cardinal for 2 years. Became a cardinal in 2023, and he did absolutely support Pope Francis's approach to try to bring we the people, the laity, to have more of a voice in the church and participation in our church, which, by the way, is, something that goes all the way back to the church fathers. The laity have a voice and have a participation. We're all one body of Christ. That's how the Catholic Church looks at these things. That's kind of a biblical outlook. Yes, he is supportive of what Francis tried to do, but one of the key distinctions that you hear about this guy is, unlike Francis, in fact, a huge difference to Pope Francis, as this guy, Pope Leo the 14th, is very measured. He is very cautious. He is very circumspect when he speaks. He often chooses his words carefully. Let me tell you something. As a frustrated Catholic for the past 10 years with Pope Francis, one of the biggest, most frustrating things about him was that Francis was the opposite. He would shoot from the hip. He would just sort of, he was like hanging out with the guys, but half of those guys were reporters who hate the church, who are trying to divide the church and change the church and think that the church is awful because the church doesn't let women be priests or doesn't let, gay and transgender people be priests. And unlike the movie Conclave. And he would just sort of muse and talk like a Jesuit would and say, well, theoretically, this. It's like, no, stop with the theoretically, Pope Francis. You're a teacher. You're supposed to be clear. You're supposed to be measured. When you speak, it affects hundreds of millions. It seems like Leo's not that kind of guy. Also, by the way, since he's fluent in English, when he says things, we're not going to have to wait for translations and all of that stuff. He knows exactly what he means. That was the roadblock with Francis as well, as the American press would take stuff that he said and twist it immediately, and then it would take 3 days for the Vatican to come back and say, oh, no, the Pope didn't say that. He didn't mean that. Well, that hopefully won't be a problem. That said, if you're looking for this Pope to come out and say, yeah, absolutely, Trump is right, secure that border and deport all the illegals. Well, first of all, it's not going to be the role of a pope to micromanage what the immigration policies for the United States are going to be. Yes, as an American cardinal, he is just as guilty as all the other bishops in being in partnership with the American government, taking money from the American government, no matter how altruistic their purposes were, and getting a whole lot of tax dollars to care for and facilitate the movement of illegal immigrants. It was wrong, and it has now stopped because the federal government has turned off the spigot. Of course, his position is going to be, as I would expect every pope's position to be, that if they're poor and needy people who need our help, we are obligated as human beings to help them. But that doesn't mean that that power stretches to demanding the government do that work, number one. And number two, your vote is not dictated by what the church tells you you're supposed to do on a personal level. In other words, you can say, yeah, of course we should help the needy, but that doesn't mean that I should vote for a government that will take over that responsibility because the government does it wrong. If you really want to help the needy, we individuals step up and do it privately, not through Marxism. And I assure you that is in keeping with not only Pope Leo XIV, but with the Catechism of the Catholic Church. So there you have it. That's my take. We'll get Ed Morrissey's take a little bit later. And kind of cool times. I think everyone should just hold their breath, relish the moment that we, for the first time in world history, have an American pope, or a pope born in America, more accurately. And let's just wait and see before we make a determination of who this guy is and whether he's a... One thing I can tell you, he has voted in the Republican primaries in Illinois recently. If you live in Illinois and you go out of your way to vote in the Republican primary, I think that says something, especially considering how dominant the Democrats are in that state. So take a deep breath, count to 10, and don't immediately think that this guy is Bernie Sanders in a Pope hat. It's 5:24. Coming up, lost in the hoopla over the Pope announcement was a giant announcement out of the Oval Office, a trade deal with the United Kingdom. It addresses the tariffs, the trade imbalance, the non-tariff trade barriers that the UK had put up. We're going to give all the details on that huge victory next.
WMAL FM, Woodbridge, Washington, a Cumulus media station. Making sense of the news. News Talk 105.9. News now. Now on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app. O'Connor and Company.
Good Friday morning, 5:36. O'Connor and Company, thank you. Busy morning. We just sort of broke down quite a bit about Pope Leo XIV and what to expect. And, well, the answer is we don't know for sure, except he's going to maintain the Catholic doctrines, such as been done for, a few millennia. That's not true, a couple millennia. Coming up at 7:05, Nick Callio, President and CEO of Airlines for America, on the announcement of upgrading our air traffic control system yesterday. 7:35, SBA Administrator Kelly Loeffler. And 8:05, Ed Morrissey of Hot Air, who's kind of a Pope watcher, as it were. It's Larry O'Connor with Patrice Onwuka. Good morning, Patrice.
Happy Friday, Larry.
It is, and it's Happy Friday if you're doing any sort of trade and commerce with the United Kingdom, because as of yesterday, a brand new trade deal has been forged. Here's the president announcing it.
This morning, I'm thrilled to announce that we've reached a breakthrough trade deal with the United Kingdom. Incredible country. Today is a victory day for World War II. We won the war together exactly 80 years ago, so there could be no more perfect morning to reach this historic agreement, and it's beautiful weather out, I will tell you that.
Yeah, kind of cool that this was announced on VE Day.
Yes.
Quick snapshot here. First of all, I'd love for you to get into the numbers part of it, Patrice, but in terms of the commerce for goods and products, we now have access to the UK market that had been basically blocked through tariffs and also through other protectionist measures that the UK had employed for decades. This is for things like ethanol, American beef, which I think the Brits are going to be happy about, cereals, fruits, vegetables, animal feed, tobacco, which is shocking because it was one of the reasons why the Brits sent all these colonies up over here to get that great American tobacco back.
Yeah.
Soft drinks, shellfish, textiles, chemicals, machinery, a whole lot more. This is all stuff that was basically impossible for Americans to do business with and commerce with the UK. Now we can because of the adjustments of these numbers. What's it look like?
So here's what we're looking at: $5 billion in new market access. So all of those goods that you were mentioning, our tariffs there's going to be a 10% baseline on tariffs. There's going to be removal of some of the tariffs that were placed on specific categories, such as automobiles, and what was the other one here? Let me look at my notes here. I'll steel and aluminum. Those tariffs are going to be disappearing or moving down to a very, very low level. So basically what you have here is it's a framework. I think the specifics will be hammered out over the next few weeks to maybe months. But you hit on a couple of good points. Expanded market access, so U.S. goods going into the U.K. market, but also the reduction of non-tariff barriers. These are the kinds of things that make it difficult, even if it's not a specific tariff, but for U.S. companies to be able to sell their goods overseas. I mean, we're talking about things that could be import quotas, licensing requirements, these ridiculous product standards that really don't matter when it comes to the quality of the goods that are being purchased. So by reforming some of the processes, to be able to bring these goods in. I think there's even going to be some work on, what was it called, streamlining the customs process, which if you've ever tried to bring products into a country from the United States, or if you're living in another country from the United States, you realize customs is a shakedown.
Yep.
And so
unless
if there's a way to streamline that. Unless you have a free trade or a fairer trade deal, Larry. And I think that's what we're getting at here. So will this be the pattern for future trade deals in other countries? I think this is a little bit more bespoke, meaning customized, but that doesn't mean that other trade deals won't have a similar pattern, the common thread being a 10% tariff baseline.
Yeah. He also announced, by the way, at the same time on airplane parts, a $10 billion procurement deal with Boeing. That's a big deal. I also like this. I think this is interesting, that they have resecured the supply chain for certain pharmaceuticals and products that participate in the manufacturing of pharmaceuticals. That actually is sort of a hidden, I think, strategy to jujitsu China a little bit, because China has tried to position themselves as a global player in pharmaceuticals. We here in America, I believe, are too reliant on that country for it. We can't cut ourselves from China on that respect unless we've got an alternative. And the fact that part of this deal was to have a secure supply chain for pharmaceutical products back and forth with the UK, I think is important. Also,
and to your point, Larry, on China, the United States, their representatives are going to be meeting with China tomorrow,
in Geneva.
And not just for a specific trade deal, but to open those negotiations. So coming into it, they're coming into it with a little bit of wind on their backs of, okay, we actually have a major trading partner, a deal or a framework on the table here, and so that gives the United States, I think, a bit more leverage when dealing with China directly.
I think you're right. In fact, I'd like to break this conversation down into two parts: the deal and then the art of the deal. And the art part, especially how it might influence the talks with China, and also how Trump played a big part in these negotiations here, we're going to get into next. That's the art part of it. And the British the British ambassador actually revealed a bit about Trump's direct participation in here. So that's the art of the deal that we'll get to in a sec. But in terms of the deal itself, the other key, I think, interesting aspect of this first deal with the United Kingdom, first of all, very sweet that it was done on VE Day. The fact that we have a special relationship, let's face it, that's the right way to call it, since we used to be their colony and now, we're sort of the grown-up in the relationship. We also, strangely, of all the countries around the world, we currently have a trade surplus with the United Kingdom. So listen, the UK wants more access to this country because we're the biggest customers on the planet. So they were extra motivated to get in here. Not only there is a demand in their country already for Americans' goods and products and things because we have a trade surplus with them, but also they want better access to our markets as well. And so there was a win-win on both sides of this equation. That makes the deal possible. Just 5 weeks after the tariffs. One other quick thing, Patrice, before we break. The S&P 500 yesterday closed at almost the exact same place it was. In fact, it was a little higher than the day before we had that huge plunge after the tariffs were announced. So if you measure the health of the American economy based on the market, we're exactly where we were right before Trump announced the tariffs, and there's nowhere to go but up with all the other
Exactly.
deals that are about to be made. All right. So now what about the art of this deal and Trump's participation? We'll get to that in a moment. It's 5:44.
Later this morning on the Chris Plant Show, Joe Biden on The View says Kamala lost the election because we're all racist and sexist. 9 a.m. on WMAL.
All right, we gave you a little bit about this deal and the details of it and how it affects trade between the UK. But let's talk about the art of the deal. First of all, you remember when the Brexit vote was going on and Obama tried to meddle in a foreign country's vote?
Yes.
He was against Brexit, right? And I remember so vividly, he said, well, one thing you should keep in mind that when America's making a trade deal, England's going to have to go to the back of the queue, which, by the way, no American says back of the queue, but he was saying that to appeal to British people. He said, we're going to make a deal with the EU before we make a deal with the UK. Well, Trump just did the opposite. The EU is now scrambling. EU's like, oh, great. Okay, so the UK is now in a better trading position with the U.S. because they left the European Union. And so I think that's going to just signal that. I mean, listen, the EU has a choice to make. Do you want to throw down with China? Anti-liberty, anti-freedom, slave labor, and you can't trust them. And, oh, by the way, they haven't been protecting you with their military for the last 70 years. Or do you make a deal with America, your actual ally? And I think that, well, the question answers itself. But that, I think, is a big part of this as these other countries start to fall in line, don't you, Patrice?
I mean, I do. There needed to be someone that went first. And I actually thought it would have been a Southeast Asian country instead. But hey, I'm happy that it's the UK. The UK's deal was always considered going to be a little bit easier, low-hanging fruit, because we are one of the close. They're, I think, our fifth or sixth trading partner. But that said, it's very symbolic, and I think it sets a very, very strong message that, listen, if the UK and the United States can forge ahead on a 10% tariff, I mean, we're going from an average of 2.4% to 10%. That's going to be the baseline, folks. So the idea of you're going to have zero tariffs, I think that's gone out of the window at this point. And so any countries that were holding out, they're probably going to have to come to the realization that this is the new normal.
Well, and that EU VAT tax is a huge non-tariff barrier that they're going to have to deal with it, and they have to face reality that is an issue. Let's talk about Trump's involvement here. It was funny. Trump made a comment about, he rolled his eyes at the process that has gone on in the past, having meetings about setting up the next meeting. And, it's like meeting after meeting.
Yes.
And Trump's like, can we just make a deal? Can we just get on the phone and make a deal here? Everybody get out of the way. And it seems like that's what happened. And then they turned to the United Kingdom's ambassador to the U.S., and he was hilarious, by the way. And listen to his first comments here, specifically directed at President Trump and his involvement.
Well, Mr. President, thank you very much indeed in hosting us this morning. And thank you very much indeed also for that very typical 11th hour intervention by you with your phone call to the President, demanding even more out of this deal than any of us expected. So thank you for that. The Prime Minister was delighted, obviously, to take that call later tonight. But you took...
I love that. Thanks so much for the 11th hour frantic demand for even more. The Prime Minister was really delighted to take that call late at night. But you could see Trump saying, hey, the deal's not good enough. We almost got a deal. Just give me this now.
Well, and listen, the UK Prime Minister is not going to turn him down. I mean, it's not the case where he could say, oh, no, I'm not going to take the call of the President of the United States. And this is the first president, though, who approaches these trade deals and negotiations not from the position of the long-standing traditions of we work through different layers of representatives talking to each other, and we, the principals, may never actually talk until we have that day where we shake hands with the big ceremonial of press event and all of that. Everybody else does all of the small stuff. Now, President Trump said, actually, I'm good at this. This is what I've done throughout my entire career, and I know what I want to see done. I don't think it necessarily it's suggesting that he doesn't believe the people who are working for him can get it done, but that he adds that extra pressure. And Mr. President, if you're listening, we need that extra pressure in this tax deal because there are too many kittens jumping out of the basket right now, and we hope that you can corral them to stay in, and please don't increase taxes.
I have no doubt that that's on the agenda as well. I'm sure Chip Roy is readying himself for that conversation. It's 5:53. All right, coming up, this busy morning continues. 6 o'clock hour, we'll talk about a revamp of our air traffic control system. About 25, 30 years in the waiting. We're finally getting it done.